Welcome to 1850 Main Street, a place where friends get together and talk about their country and hope for a brighter future. Today, Rob Walgate and Alan C. Duncan from the Public Square are joined by David Zanotti, the CEO of the American Policy Roundtable.
When someone finally comes around to the right side of an issue, is it our job to tell them they should have gotten here sooner?
Do you remember years ago, big Midwestern state governor's race, and the leading contenders are vying for approval in the pro-life community, vying for the pro-life vote. So there's a number of Republicans that are challenging each other.
I can feel my blood pressure rising.
And a candidate in the race for governor has what could be, I think, legitimately called a conversion. He's been in a moderate position to a liberal position in regards to the question of abortion. And after really seriously thinking it through, meeting with people, he comes forward and says, you know what? I've been wrong. I've really rethought this. I really do think that the pro-life position in regards to protection of the life of the unborn is where we should be. I've looked at Roe versus Wade. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't hold up as a lawyer. I think we've been mistaken. It runs a precursor 20 years ahead of what the Supreme Court would ultimately do in the Dobbs decision.
And
what happened?
One of his opponents basically sent out mailers and in speeches and debates said, that's great, but you weren't pro-life soon enough. I've been pro-life for 30 years.
You should have come soon.
Not for the last 5. And I wanted to puke. I wanted to turn over tables. I wanted to scream because of what the person that had been pro-life for 30 years just said. Why would anyone ever bother to convert to a pro-life position? Because all we're going to do is bash you that you weren't there soon enough. That person should have put their arm around them and said, I am so glad
welcome home
to have you on this team. You're now right. I'm going to be a better governor than you, but I'm glad we agree on this issue.
That's the thing. Was it about winning the race or did they actually care about the issue?
I knew this person. I know it was a genuine conversion.
Not the other person.
Oh.
I'm saying the other person. Did the other person genuinely care about the issue and bringing people along? Or did they just want to win?
Sure, were they just mad because now someone pulled the rug out from under them on a point? You know, this is 3 points in the primary election and I just lost them.
Yeah, I feel like there's a biblical parable about this. The prodigal son pops to mind. The older brother is mad that, hey, I've been here all along. And now here comes my younger brother, blows all his inheritance and spends it frivolously and wickedly. And now he's coming back and he gets a party. Yeah, he does. And you should have been happy too.
The good kids always take issue with the story of the prodigal son, don't they? I'm thankful for that story. No,
that's what I'm saying.
I know.
And if you've ever been in a family-owned business, you know that there's lots of different ways to run a family business. And some people choose what's called a sub-S corporation, which means that at the end of the year, what's left over gets divided up based upon the shareholders. That means that if one brother is working in accounting and the other one's working in purchasing, and the one in purchasing seems to be spending too much money, the one from accounting saying, excuse me, that's a part of my percentage at the end of the year. Tighten up your act. You're spending my dough. Well, I think that's exactly what the prodigal son's older brother was saying.
Yeah.
He's like, whoa, excuse me.
He was the accountant.
I'm paying. That's my fatted calf. Yeah. Wait a second.
The belt and suspenders guy was calling him out.
Yeah. I remember talking to my dad, reading that story to me.
Yeah.
And I was upset that the older brother got in trouble at the end and that he was wrong. I was like, he's making a great point. I remember being a kid or a teenager, I thought, this guy's got a point. Why is he doing this?
The firstborn argument, I believe.
Yeah, kind of was. But guilty as charged. But I was missing the point of the parable to say that.
Yeah.
Because the way my dad explained to me, he said, listen, think about your brothers. If one of them did that and we thought he was dead and he came back, wouldn't you be happy? I was like, yeah, I guess I would be.
So this whole question of this, it's a beautiful human tendency because we acclimate to what we're familiar with and then we fall into patterns of habituation. And then the next thing, reality comes knocking on the door and we answer with our pants off. We just look foolish. Our pants are, we just like, oh, what an idiot. Okay.
And also, I know the term flip-flopping is thrown around in politics all the time. Right. And the reality is, if someone's wrong on an issue, I want them to flip-flop. Now, I want them to be consistent when they flip-flop to the right side. I don't want them to flip-flop back and forth. But I want you to at least flip to the correct position.
Flip and hold.
Yeah, flip and hold. Don't flip-flop, flip and hold.
Flip and hold.
Not because we have any connection. We have never had, as of yet, though we hope to, we've never had a personal sit-down conversation with Tulsi Gabbard or with Bobby Kennedy, with RFK Jr. We never have. What's happened in this political election is unusual. There are people who are coming to a different point of view and who are embracing a campaign that no one thought they ever would. These people both ran for the presidency. They both have serious credentials in regards to public service. This is not a small deal. So they've come over. And now the question is, I'm watching what's happening on the other side. There are at least two instances where I've seen with my own eyes. One was James Carville, who basically has made statements about Bobby Kennedy saying that if we were a benevolent society, we would get Bobby Kennedy off the streets and into a home where he could be sequestered away from the public and not hurt people. This is
the man that fights for chemicals out of food and encourages people to be healthy.
Okay.
That's one of the most cruel things you could say about someone, I think.
But wait, I think there's one that's even gone past that.
All right.
One analyst, and I'll leave him nameless at this stage in the game, Carville was an unavoidable one passing analyst, I believe it was on NBC or one of the NBC affiliates, made the comment of a parallel analysis that Bobby Kennedy Jr. was equivalent to Jeffrey Dahmer. I heard it with my own ears, saw it with my own eyes.
Why? What did they base that on?
That what he has done is at the level of betraying atrocity to the human race that is akin to a Jeffrey Dahmer-like event, a serial killer. I heard it with my own ears.
Bobby Kennedy tried to be with the Democrats. He tried feverishly to join the Democratic process, the Democratic Party, and be with them. They pushed him away.
They did. Yeah, pretty hard. Okay, so those are wild accusations. What about some of the more semi-reasonable points that people might have where they're upset that they say, okay, look, you tweeted this about Donald Trump. You've said this about him, that you would never be a part of his ticket, which he's not part of the ticket. But you said all these things, and now you're doing this. What about the person who's genuinely confused? What do we say to that?
I think they have to do more homework and ask some serious questions like, what's the motivation? What exactly?
Yeah.
Kennedy's very transparent, saying, look, I can't get to the White House and there's things I care about. I'm 70 years old. I'm not going to live forever. I think that we need to make progress on these issues. And I have been assured, and I believe I've been heard, and that I can, and that I have a window here, an avenue to make an impact. I'm not going to be president, but the issues I care about could go forward with this administration. And I went to the other guys, and they won't return my phone calls. So look, we're in the public policy business. We advocate for issues and positions and principles. What would be wrong with that?
And if this was something new, if he just suddenly started saying, oh, I care about these things, that would be maybe suspicious. But these are the types of things that he's cared about throughout his entire career.
Go ahead.
And his sister, she put out a statement that basically disavowed him from the family. And you look at, I'm not trying to disparage a family name, but you look at some of the things that the Kennedy family have done through the years, and everybody stood by them because it was beneficially politically.
And you know what?
Families can be tough.
Families can be tough, right?
But for
families
this one, they pushed one out.
And he does have some family members working with him as well. So he made a point of that.
Yeah,
so it's not his entire family, but it is a chunk of it.
Thanks for stopping by at 1850 Main Street. We're glad you're here. Do you want to learn more about what is really going on behind the scenes in public policy? Tune in to The Public Square on over 200 radio stations coast to coast. Or download the free Public Square mobile app from your app store. Just look for The Lamppost. Find out what America is really talking about at thepublicsquare.com.
Let's take a third illustration on the conversation of conversion. This one surprised me because everybody has heard the story about C.S. Lewis. It's a wonderful story. The Question of God, the class that Dr. Armin Nikolai taught for years at Harvard Medical School, one of the most popular classes at Harvard, talking about the conversion of C.S. Lewis. We did several programs on that on the Public Square. It's very much worth listening to. But one of the programs I liked the best we did about C.S. Lewis on the Public Square was Christmas in America. All right, let's see if we can find it on the wall in here. It's Christmas in America. It was 1951, wasn't it?
Right there, 50.
1950.
Right
Christmas
there.
in America, 1950, in which we told the story of C.S. Lewis and his conversion. And I just ran into 2 books this morning that made me stop and think about this again. Now, what this book is, That Hideous Strength. All right, this is my 1976
That was
edition.
assigned reading at the American Policy Roundtable the summer, I believe, of 2020. I believe.
Have you finished yet?
No.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, I did audiobook. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was cutting the grass, listening. Yeah.
Okay.
I grabbed my copy too, though. When I saw you had yours, I was like, I got to get mine off the
This
shelf.
is the 1976 edition of it that I first read in 1976. And yes, that makes me old. I get that. But Francis Schaeffer said everyone in America should read this book.
That's such a fascinating quote. I heard you say that recently, and I thought we're not even close to that happening.
Oh.
They should. That should be on the level of 1984. You know, that's one book
Yes.
where you could think, everyone probably has. They
it's-
at least know about 1984.
It is so
This
much
should be
more
at that level.
substantive than 1984. It is so much more.
Well, again, I say this all the time every time we talk about it. Orwell reviewed this book before 1984 ever came out. So did he get any ideas from it? I don't know. I'd have to do more research. But I know that his review came out before his book came out.
So this is a book in which C.S. Lewis explains how a technocracy could and would arise, primarily leveraging the power of nationalized healthcare.
Nice.
The NICE, N-I-C-E.
N-I-C-E.
He called it the NICE long before the British Healthcare Service would be known by that name.
That's crazy.
And how they would ultimately fail in their attempt to take over the world, but how they would attempt to do so. Now, this was written in 1946 after Lewis had experienced World War I as a soldier and then World War II as a philosopher attempting to work with the BBC to help the Brits keep their not lose their minds while they're being bombed every single night by the Nazis, and the Americans are diddling around on the other side of the Atlantic wondering whether they should get involved or not. All right, so Lewis was doing everything he could to help his country hold together, and particularly to speak from a biblical perspective into the midst of this conflict. And after the war, he writes this book, That Hideous Strength, projecting what he sees. Now, you would think 46, the war's been won. Thanks be to God. Now we can move forward, and there would be some great happy story. He writes a story that is even more frightening, literally seeing what was coming, and particularly in regards to the Soviet Empire. But the whole realm, he got totalitarianism. He got it. He understood it. He exposed it in this book. And then he exposed the spiritual dynamics behind it all. Most amazing read. I got to give you one line, Alan. You got to kick out of it.
I saw you open
Right.
to a page there.
Right.
Yeah.
A page in my version, it's page 349. It's in the chapter Banquet at Belbury. It's right toward the end of the book. All right. And he talks about the fact, but the doom of the gibberish frustrated all their efforts. It's a magnificent scene at the end of this where all of the players that are basically representative of the technocracy are together at a dinner. And they're desperately trying to get their plan over the finish line to wipe out all of their enemies. And they get to a point where they stand up and the director starts to make a speech. And the next thing you know, it sounds like he's drunk. He's slurring his words. And someone gets up to try to help him. And they're speaking as if they're drunk and can't put their sentences and their thoughts together. And eventually, this epidemic of gibberish takes over the entire room. And they suddenly cease to understand each other. And their frustration rises to the point where it starts to break out into violence. And in essence, in the end, they destroy each other. And it reminds me of what happens when someone leaves the political fold and then he must be destroyed because he's left the camp. But what also reminds me of the Tower of Babel.
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
The gibberish in the end, the doom of the gibberish destroy them all. There comes to a point when you're not telling the truth that eventually, no matter what you say, it doesn't make any sense.
Which is the opposite of Pentecost, when people are speaking in tongues that they didn't know, but it's to be able to communicate across the divide once again with Christ.
To reveal a greater truth.
Yeah, with Christ being the point that you're talking about.
Lewis was doing all this stuff. Yes, it's in here. It's really fascinating.
It's a great read. Everyone should read that book.
The point, though, that I really want to make is how does it apply into this question of conversion? Well, here's a book from C.S. Lewis, actually his first publication.
Oh.
A book written by someone named Clive Hamilton. This was the first work that Lewis ever published, years and years before this time, when he was still an atheist. Yeah. And it's titled Spirits in Bondage. And he writes a series of poems regarding his hatred for biblical revelation, and in particularly for Christianity. He has a poem in here called The Witch, which is absolutely terrifying in regards to evil. It's Dungeon Greats.
Are you going to read a little bit of it?
No, I'll leave it for those to find out.
Okay.
But what it comes down to is this is a guy who's writing some of the most antagonistic, anti-Christian, violent poetry, deeply conflicted, angst, and this was C.S. Lewis under a different name.
Yeah.
So what would have happened at Oxford if, when Lewis suddenly begins to melt by being surrounded by Christian scholars in study groups and in writing groups?
Tolkien, Owen Barfield, all those guys.
They start to get to him. They're thinking, they're they're creating questions he can't answer. And Lewis talks magnificently about he began to thaw, like his soul began to thaw. And he realized that he had been an atheist. He knew he was an atheist. He knew he hated so many things, and God being one of them. He
was an atheist, but he hated God. So,
in addition to that, he called himself an atheist. And now he's at the position where he says, suddenly I realized I've become a theist.
Oops.
He didn't walk down an aisle, didn't fill out a card, didn't go to a crusade or to an evangelistic rally. He suddenly realized that what he didn't believe, what he used to believe, he no longer believed. His mind was changed. Now, what if he had gone back to the guys in the study group and the Inklings and said, this is what's happening? They would have said, about time, you moron.
Why didn't you come sooner?
Why weren't you here sooner? And what do you mean you're just a theist? You mean you're not a Christian yet, for crying out loud? What's wrong? No, the patience, the benevolence, the love, the friendship. And it wasn't a phony friendship. They loved him whether he was an atheist or a theist or a Christian. They simply chose to love him. It was a choice. Eventually, and this is, I hope everyone will go to the American Policy Roundtable site or to thepublicsquare.com. Go to thepublicsquare.com. That's the better site. And click on Christmas in America and go to Christmas in America 1950. Listen to how this story unfolds. And it's magical in this presentation because there's Christmas music and it's a live audience. It's a radio variety show. And you can hear the story told in a celebratory fashion. But what ended up happening to Lewis not only changed his life, it changed the world.
Yeah. It's much like the Apostle Paul. He was a very, and when he was Saul, you mentioned he published this under a different name.
Yeah.
Paul was working under a different name as well prior to his conversion. And the Christian community could have been very suspect of Paul. And maybe they were at first. The Bible is honest about that. But eventually he was embraced as an apostle.
And I know there's a significant difference between political conversion on attitudes and issues and on a genuine spiritual conversion in coming into the light of true faith. I understand all that. I'm not trying to make them moral equivalent. But I think that our attitude should be the same. When people are coming to the light, isn't that the time to sit down and say, let's have coffee? Or in Lewis's case, tea. or maybe something a little harder. All right.
I wanted to mention that too.
All right. Maybe a pint. Go ahead. Yes.
We talk about 1850. Want this to be like a local pub, a place to gather where people could talk about God, like Lewis did with Tolkien and his friends. There's a chapter in this book. I won't read the whole quote, but again, you could find it. The chapter is called "The Liquidation of Anachronisms." Okay, so I'm interpreting that as getting rid of all the old stuff. That seems to be what they're talking about here. One of the things that technocracy wanted to do was destroy the local pub. They did not want people meeting and chatting and talking and being human together. They wanted to destroy that. That wasn't healthy enough.
No kidding.
Yeah, that's on this in this book. That's on page 87 and 88.
They would really hate this program.
They would hate this program.
Wow.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.